birthday coming, and it's all I need. Everything I wanted.
Every time I hear that, I always smile, and I'm always just nervous that they're going to kick us off because I licensed it for episode 0 to 50, and I hope that that works versus typing in the episode title every time.
Find him, licensed people. His handle's Cypherpunk Cine. Sue the shit out of him.
Oh man, he's so good. Apparently, the Better Buy handle still is not approved yet, but we're good. Yeah, Zach, you had a couple interesting thoughts about what's going on in the world today. Apparently, China is about to get wrecked, or are we about to get wrecked?
Generally speaking, I think in fights like this, everybody gets wrecked. I think everyone can prepare their anus.
Buckle up, boys.
You can put that one on the recap.
How well did that short perform? Probably well.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we were kicking around on the thread this rumor going around that Hollywood movies would be tariffed or whatever. I think that's TBD. But it brings up an interesting question about there's a few things on my mind. You got the fact that Hollywood is objectively broken. I can't even say how many meetings Corey and I have been in where that's basically the consensus view. Something's broken. It needs to be fixed. And so does this situation we're in with tariffs and whatever's going on, result not just in Hollywood, a broken Hollywood being fixed, but a broken global order being fixed? And then the other question is like, how do you, Hollywood used to export culture, and if our culture is struggling, then that export will struggle as well. And then the other question is like, how do we tariff things in a digital environment? How do you tariff digital goods? Which is not something I've thought about at all, but is worth thinking about if anybody has any opinions. Corey, you had a good point I'd like you to dive into about bonding for films. And if, let's say that they did tariff movies over to China or whatever, how that would affect the financing side of movies. Thoughts?
Yeah, it would go immediately upstream into every single movie that's being developed right now and being underwritten. Because the studios look at what they can get from the domestic market, from America, from a 3,000 screen theatrical release. They know how many marketing dollars go into that. And when you see crazy film budgets of $150 to $300 million and assume generally that marketing spends about as much as the budget on a big budget movie, these are like big studio movies. This is all very large generalizations, but they want to make their money back on the American market or get close, maybe 60 to 80% of their money back on the American market. And then the international market is where they make up most of the rest of it. And if you look at the tables of where movies are watched and people really spend money on movies, most of the places around the world where you buy a movie ticket, it's not $20 to $25 like it's become in America. It's like 10 to 14 maximum. So you're getting a lot less dollars for, and you need a lot more eyeballs for it. So the primary driver of foreign territories is the Chinese market, because they can mobilize hundreds of millions of people. They can get another America to watch the movie and send that money back. And they're counting on that. The studios are counting on that. There were some really ham-fisted ways, like that movie, The Great Wall with Matt Damon. That was literally, it's like an AI movie before AI, where they typed in who plays well in China, what's a Chinese concept that we could do that would also be watched here, smashed it together. Someone wrote a script, and yeah, it came out. Some of China watched it, so it wasn't a total disaster, but it was a pretty big disaster. But every Marvel movie, right, when you see the Avengers Endgame made, what, $1.6 billion or something, a lot of that is the American market watching it 3 times, but a huge amount of that is every single Chinese viewer went to see it. So it goes all the way back upstream. You think like most of the mid-tier movies went away, but at least we have these big budget movies that the studios are still doing. If this were to go on for an extended period of time, there is nothing that would be green lit over $150 million. And you might be, if you're a cinephile, you might say, oh, boo hoo, we won't get a bunch more retreads and sequels and whatnot. But if those things go away, literally sustains an enormous pillar of Hollywood. And that could, I mean, the ripple effects of that could be, massive layoffs and studios shutting down, actors, who are counting on that completely out of work, and the crater in real estate, the crater in the LA area could be extremely significant. If you imagine like how many billions of dollars every year we're counting on from China, and that if that were to just kind of go away, right? If you put a 100% tariff on it, it essentially means you wouldn't ever have a U.S. movie distributed in China. The upstream effects of that, if that were even in place for a year, could be absolutely devastating to Los Angeles.
What you talk about theatrical releases, like obviously that's declined significantly, and we're in the age of the streamer. How are they calculating revenue for streaming services? Let's say just a Netflix only movie that they're not releasing theatrically. How would the calculus be on that?
As far as I know, they have their own streaming services that have these big licensing deals. So I think it would move upstream in the same way, right? Where they still have to pay a lot of money to put them on their own streamers. I don't know the economics of that as well. And as far as I know, the streaming deals in China are it's still the theatrical release in China. That's the big needle mover for it. It used to be the DVD market. We could sell DVDs over there. And then that went away. So I think it still would move upstream. And of course, the economics of the streamers financing their own movies is totally different, because 3 of the major streamers don't need to make any money, and the other ones do, which is that's a whole other dynamic that's going to keep playing out over the year. But if you look at empirical theatrical data, the worldwide number is only down a couple of percent over the past 5 years. We think of it as cratering, but mostly that's because we spent 5 times as much money as we did previously, and a lot of those movies lost money. But the actual empirical number is just creeping down slowly, as it looks just like an industry slowly in decline. It doesn't look like a crater, apart from the COVID years, of course.
So if we
before and after, yeah.
If we adjust that number for inflation, they're down like 40%.
It's probably even worse than that, right? Like it's wild to me. And I'm actually curious, Corey, if you could corroborate. Like, my understanding is that a studio success is 2x total P&A. Right. So it's like if you have a $150 million movie, including P&A, which is print and advertising. So it's like everything. So it's like the production budget plus what you spend advertising and get eyeballs. If you have a $150 million movie, like total, including production and everything, so that'd be usually it's half. So it'd be like a $75 million movie with $75 million P&A. You need to make $300 million back, or it's not a success. Like, they're not going to kind of look back at it as a proper thing. You need to make 100% on your money, essentially.
Yeah. That's still the conventional wisdom, as far as I know.
Yeah. And so it's interesting because it continues to give credence to the Mr. Beast model, right? Where it's like you get, I think Mr. Beast is a really interesting character, because he's actually, I would consider him the Elon Musk of content. And what I mean by that is, he will throw 100% of his money into everything he does. And it's the same thing with Elon with his companies. Elon will throw 100% of his money. He burns the ships, if you're familiar with the Cortez quote. Like, he will burn the ships to make the thing work. And it's really interesting because it's working, and we don't really see that in Hollywood anymore. I actually think, the last vestige of something like that is like a, not like Nolan doesn't need to do that, but I would say he does it from a credibility perspective. Like, he puts all of his credibility into his next project. Hasn't been always a success, if you have seen Tenet, but it's I don't know. It's interesting. Like, how do you think that dynamic is going to change if we get to this world where you have to make now 3x your money? $150 million movie now needs to make $450 million with only the U.S. market. Or I guess you did, that would include China, but it's like if 104% tariff is there, you now need to make 450. So it's literally, you can only do tentpoles. You can only do Marvel, essentially.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm saying if you have 100% tariff, and it doubles the cost of a movie ticket as functionally, right? If they pass that on to their consumer, you just have to assume you lose at least half, or go down to a quarter of the audience. If the American movie is $20 and the Chinese movie is $10, like China has a robust, its own Hollywood. They make a lot of movies, and they have a lot of great filmmakers. So they need American movies less than they did before they had that. But I think, even farther upstream, that, like exactly what you're talking about, like the $300 million tentpole is kind of the standard right now. Every studio has a couple of $300 million movies, and every streamer is coming out with those as well. But if you just go upstream from that and they say, now the upside of that, the success is $600 million. And we think now that the Chinese market is, let's just call it gone, or let's just call it like a tenth of what it was before, maybe a quarter of what it was before. That means we can only spend, you know, you bring it all the way down, just the Chinese market. You bring the $300 million budget total down to like 200 million. And then every other country, right? Even if it's not 100% tariff, like what is the haircut that every other country is adding when you take out that foreign sales? You're counting on the foreign sales being bigger. You're talking about more than half of the budget being heavily impacted. So I think there's only a handful of directors that can command that, and Nolan's one of them. Villeneuve is one of them. And even some of the like Scorsese, the only reason Scorsese got $200 million for Killers of the Flower Moon was because Apple wanted to buy an Oscar. No other studio would give that to him because they knew it didn't underwrite. I think you're going to see that more and more. And the only movies at that scale that would get made that way would be vanity projects from companies that don't actually need to make the money back. And that's a very, very tenuous, right? You have Jeff Bezos on the control of one of those. You have Tim Cook on the control of one of those. And it literally, they could just change their mind about the risk profile of that. And they're holding, the balance of LA big budget movies just in their hand based on a balance sheet of a company that has nothing to do with movies. And that's an unbelievably unrooted, risky place for Hollywood to be.
I think that we're just witnessing the death of this model.
Yeah.
Tariffs might speed it up. The economic situation might speed it up, but same thing in 2008, you had catalysts that pushed something, that pulled something forward that were going to happen anyway with the advent of the internet and new revenue models. I kind of to your point, JD, about we haven't seen these things come out of Hollywood where people are putting everything on the line. But the reason for that is because of the corporate structure. There's no one who has any incentive to do that because there's not one person who owns or has control of, a studio or a given project that can monetize it, in a way that would give a return in the way that Saylor owns MST, controls MicroStrategy, or that Elon controls what he does with the revenue and the investment in his companies. I think that we're going to see this fragment, and I think that we're going to start to see individual filmmakers or content creators start to generate their own little empires, and you're going to see platforms like IndieHub and Substack and whatever start to facilitate the plumbing of individuals that end up having a massive following. So I really do honestly think, I don't know about the time frame exactly, but I really think that we're witnessing the end of the total death of the old model, and we're going into something completely new.
Yeah, I agree. And I think Hollywood itself primed the pump for a catalyst like this to happen, because an increasingly risk-off model since COVID and since the strikes, and a heavy increase in the costs of film production in America have led to riskless thinking, which is anti-cultural engagement and cultural resonance, right? And we've talked about that before on this podcast, but you've got at least 5 to 7 years, and you can even trace it back to 2008 when the $40 million adult drama disappeared. And you look at the movies in 2007, there's like 15 of them, prime filmmakers hitting 400 in the majors, like unbelievable lineup of movies in 2007. And then you start to see that class of movies slowly start to disappear. The revenue of the best picture winner over the past 15 years has gone down and down and down and down. So like what Hollywood has regarded as the best movie every year has been a less.
And he's gone.
And he's gone.
Long. Can you still hear me?
Oh,
Yeah,
It's been that long since one has made over $100 million. So Hollywood was ready and vulnerable for an attack like this because they've been doing that for so long. So I think it's going to be pretty vicious.
It's interesting to call it an attack, right? Because I actually think that's correct. Because people are not thinking about this from the outside looking in and the adversarial approach. And so what I mean by that is the studios have always looked at anybody from the outside in as an attack. It was always a walled garden. Same thing with the unions. Same thing with anything else. Like it was always, oh, you want to do this other thing? That's an attack. It's an attack on us. AI is an attack on us. Any type of offshoring is an attack on us. Like moving to Atlanta, moving to Chicago, moving to Nashville, moving to Toronto, moving to Quebec, wherever you're going. And it's really, really interesting that they just didn't see what happened in 2000 with the internet, when you had a walled garden of information in books, essentially, and then you just gave everybody instant access to that walled garden, which is, hey, now free, and thank you to the cypherpunks who kind of made this free exchange of information, and that they're continuing to fight to keep information exchange free. But what's interesting though is the attack piece of this. As you're saying about kind of these new people like the Door Brothers and all these AI filmmakers kind of like jumping up and like sprouting, it's interesting to think that, and I'm curious your take on this, Zach. Do you look at the rise of the AI filmmaker? Because I'm going to call them an AI filmmaker, right? Because they're using a tool to create a narrative film. But do you look at that as like an attack on like the craft of acting, or do you look at it more as like an opportunity to find a new way for it to like evolve? And is it inevitable, right? I'm just curious.
I don't see them as attacks. It's an evolution. AI is a tool. Just like actors use their bodies as tools, cinematographers use a camera as tools. Technology has constantly changed how we have told stories, and it will continue to do that. So I don't see it as an attack, in some adversarial sense, but it's what's happening, and it's what's going to continue to happen. And the point of a story really is to boil down some truth, and express some truth. And whatever tools people have at their disposal to, present their idea, or, whatever, I say truthful ones resonate, I guess is my point. You can tell something that's total bullshit, but generally it doesn't resonate. So, will actors be out of a job in the way that we were employed previously? Yeah. I mean, it's going to change, and people are going to have to figure out how to deal with that. I mean, we've talked about this a little bit, but like prompting, and one of the things that I complain about is writing. Over the last 15 or 20 years, great writing has taken a massive hit, and we may see a resurgence on that with prompting. Prompting is basically great writing, very, very hyper specific writing. And screenwriting is like this really interesting combo of technical understanding about how the story is being told visually, combined with, a writer has all these tools at their disposal, right? They have actors, they have camera angles, they have titles, they have, all of these things at their disposal. So, I think that AI filmmaking and traditional filmmaking will sort of bifurcate. I think that, there will always be a market for traditional films, at least for the foreseeable future. But it's an evolution in it, and I think we're definitely looking at a fork in the road.
What's the next iteration of Hollywood in your mind, Corey? Like, how does this revitalize Hollywood? Like, do we get to, everything is Altadena for 5 seconds and nothing exists, and we have to rebuild from nothing? Or, what does this look like?
Yeah, it's not hard to imagine in an environment like this. It's not hard to imagine a cataclysmic event. But there's still so much interest and still such a cultural fixation on Hollywood. There always seems to be money to bail somebody out. Over the past 5 years, we've had Hulu, Peacock, Paramount Plus, Lionsgate all fail financially. And the new investors come in, they merge, they lay off a bunch of people, and they go under some other shingle with a brand new investment. And they're all still making movies. So it's not like, I've been calling it Flint, Michigan around here, which is a little over dramatic, because in that case, literally just the executives stayed, and everything else about that industry disappeared. And I think that could happen over a longer period of time. I don't see it being as dramatic as just offshoring a factory and then, thousands of people are out of work. But that is happening pretty quickly on Hollywood standards, which moves very, very slowly. That's happening pretty quickly. Rob Lowe went viral recently for saying it's cheaper to fly 100 Americans to Ireland and shoot a movie in Ireland than it is to shoot in LA. And he's right. That's true. And so that's happening. Very little is shooting actually in LA. And I've toured a bunch of studios around the world, and they're all full of American shows. and big budget American shows that are now staffed with international people. So to me, I think the revitalization of Hollywood is a much smaller, physical Hollywood, way fewer film professionals in Los Angeles, fewer executives who are smarter, who understand the actual environment, who aren't trying to bring back the movie world of 1994. Which, when you talk around town, like I said, Hollywood moves slowly. There is still kind of this sentiment that we just push through, just carry on, stay, and eventually it'll become 1994 again. And I think that's the regressive way. That's the way that you can get really bummed out and lose all hope. But I think in the new environment, with a lot of new tools and with worldwide filmmaking, we'll still be able to have an incredible cultural impact. The right writers and the right directors can still have their voices amplified. We just have to get these $300 million movies reoriented around reality, and then we have to bring back $5 to $10 million tries that are much more like oil prospecting, right? Take $100 million and make 10 movies and see which one hits, and then learn from that, learn from each other, rather than this riskless thinking. So part of what's dying, people like Zach and I don't. Obviously it's terrible whenever anyone loses a job or loses a house or anything like that. We take no pleasure in that. But if what's dying is like the 18th Marvel movie, actually that's even low. It's probably like the 27th Marvel movie by now, right? The movies that nobody is asking for, but they know that enough people will go to financially justify it, so they do it. No one really wants it. No one really wants to make it. There's no passion around it. Those are the types of things that should be cannibalized by AI. And I think the 2000 analogy is very good in that way.
And I think too, you like peak cinema was basically peak boomer culture and career. Just look at a film set and look at who was making the best movies in the 80s, 90s. These are basically like 40, 50-year-olds who were at the absolute peak of their career, putting out the peak of the culture in which they grew up. And that's gone. That's done. We have a completely new generation coming up. Boomers are being sunsetted. Power's being sunsetted. And it's not going to look anything like what the boomers experienced or grew up in or built their businesses around. It's going to be far more localized. It's going to be far more specific. It's going to be far more niche. I've said this before, but the whole world we're going away from peak centralization, and peak centralization for humanity was basically post World War II. And that's going away. That's dying. So, I think that here's another thing. Here's another point, right? Like movies always play a huge role in propaganda as well. And there's, to your point about, Apple only funding this movie to get an Oscar, like essentially that's a small group of people, flexing or wanting to put out a particular kind of propaganda. They can do it at a loss or whatever. Those are going to remain. Those are going to stay there. But just like in 2008, what we've seen post 2008 is you just have a massive market built up underneath what was once, a total empire.
How do how do each of you guys then see LA kind of evolve? Like, what's the next version of LA in your opinion? Like, my personal opinion and my personal hope is that we become Taiwan and we have like massive like semiconductor manufacturing plants, like high tech, high quality manufacturing, because we're a port city, right? I think there's a really good case to be made about the globalization, and by that I mean the onshoring, because the globalization of semiconductor production is making it not in China. So like US actually be globalizing semiconductor production. It's like, but I think that feels to me like a pretty interesting area, because I don't know if like storytelling is going to be an export, I think, for a long time, but I just don't see with AI how this changes. And so I'm just kind of curious your takes on like, does it stay storytelling? Like what do you think?
I think it begs a broader question of a globalized or deglobalized world, or a tariff world, or however you want to say it, in the age where digital things have more value than they've ever had. physical goods are really easy to slap a tax on, but digital goods are becoming increasingly valuable, and you know, I think ultimately that's the question, right? Like California has fantastic weather. It's got a fantastic. LA's got fantastic, you know, quality of life, so to speak. But I I personally don't
Minus the
see
traffic.
yeah, minus that. I don't see manufacturing coming back to California just for politics. I mean, it makes logistical sense. But they don't want anything manufactured here. The people who run this place, they're totally anti that. So
And it
I
makes
don't
no
know.
fiscal sense at this
Yeah,
point. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube on that, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
It's
yeah, totally. The kinetic energy is gone on that deal. Like that's not coming
yeah.
back. So I don't know. I really think that LA is a big question mark right now. I think that there's always going to be a ton of value in a place that's just chill and has good weather. People are always going to pay a premium for that. But as far as LA exporting anything of tremendous value, like I really don't know, man.
Yeah,
So
it's
it
hard to
becomes more
say.
like an
I would say
Oxford.
what the inelastic good is that Hollywood has been providing for a long time is stories. It's stories. I forget what the name of that theory is, but the longer something has been around, the less likely it is to disappear. Right.
Mhm.
It's like stories and farming and prostitution. Right. As far back as we have history. And so that to me is the inelastic good. That's the demand for stories is not going to go anywhere. It's so core to humanity. And Hollywood, specifically in filmmaking, has had this monopoly on it because they've been the only ones who could centralize the writers and the directors. It's really director's medium. So they had the talent signed to them as a studio. So if you wanted to make a movie anywhere else, you had to start with the 250th best director in the world, which isn't good enough in movies.
And you didn't have the
And
supply chains. You didn't have the ability to distribute it.
exactly, exactly. So you had all of this centralization of power. So I think the question now is, do directors still have to live there? And even if they don't live there, most of my director friends who have careers don't live in Hollywood, but their
Yep.
managers do, and their agents do, and the financiers do, and the distribution does. So there's still that supply chain running through Hollywood, even as there's been this big decentralization that we've been talking about for 10 years. Most of what that's meant is that people who can call in rather than be in meetings leave, and then everyone else who has to be in meetings has to be there, right? And I feel that pressure continuing.
Yeah,
And
the
big
The
budgets.
Lindy effect, by the way, is that Lindy's
Lindy.
law,
Yeah.
which is
In
good.
big budget productions, it's still a film. You still need to be there. You still need gaffers. You still need sound guys. You still need actors. You still need crafty. You still need a big giant studio that's
Sound
relatively
important.
quiet. So, I think the big budget stuff will hang on for quite some time, but we're going to see this. We're going to see the periphery, the independents, all of that stuff is going to start to find a market and to find a way to produce things elsewhere. And the real question I think we're asking is how do stories make money going forward? And
Yeah.
the instant that somebody can make money and not do it here, they're going to. And I think that we'll see a 10 to 25, 30 year disbursement of that. And it's still going to be a hub just for all of the physical constraints we talked about. But the transition is happening, to be sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's exactly right. Like the last shoots that I've done have been in Florida, and then literally I was in Seattle yesterday on a shoot, and now I'm back in LA, and it's just it's cheaper for somebody to hire me to fly out of LA to do a shoot to come back. I'm just talking about people with some shoots today that are not in LA, and it's wild that just aspect of things, but it makes sense because it's the whole thing about why do people move to San Francisco to work in tech? So you can get a job in tech, so you can move out of San Francisco because you don't want to live in San Francisco. It's those people who can dial in, and the people who can't dial in are stuck to stay here, and that's interesting. It's like it's literally a form of indentured servitude if you really think about it. Like it's the modern day form of an indentured servant, and I'm just thinking about this out loud as I have a lot of friends from church who are actors, and they're trying to figure out what to do right now because they haven't worked in months, and their agents basically say, if you leave LA, I'm going to fire you. And so it's this really weird dichotomy because, and as you were talking about it too, Corey, like, yeah, all of the successful people I know who are showrunners or directors or whatever it is are not here. They live in Austin, or they live in Atlanta, or they live, a couple other people I know are like in Chicago or Nashville. And so it's interesting. And then they just, it's like, I'll come in for a meeting when somebody wants to, but you're going to pay for my ticket to come out here. And so, yeah, it's interesting. This, the Hollywood facade, right? It's everything is real and nothing is real at the same time.
One of the practical things that's just hyper different and I think just illustrates what we're talking about is, back in the day, you'd get called up last minute for an audition. You'd get your fucking sides faxed to you. You'd need to be there for a meeting. You needed to be localized. And all of that has changed. Most auditions are all on tape. I mean, if you're going to network or whatever, you're going to want to meet people. But it's just, that like, if you leave LA, I'm going to fire you. I mean, that's just like old school agent mentality where people needed to congregate here for obvious reasons. And that's still always going to be true. People bump into each other. They go to parties, they have friends, they have a life outside the business. And that's all has a tremendous amount of value. Like to your point, JD, the reason people go to San Francisco is because that's where all of the other smart entrepreneurial people are. And that's where the liquidity is at, so to speak. Like, where's all the trading taking place? It's where the best party's at. And that's just a matter of, that's just kinetic energy. That's just a bunch of energy has been put into this place, and it's going to be very hard to unseat that. But it is definitely being unseated. There's no question about that. And I think there'll, maybe we land on a different city. I mean, there's always going to be, proximity is always going to have value. It's just, can people afford to be, approximate in an area that's too expensive to live in?
Yeah, Austin's a really interesting one because Texas is making a very strong state play with a lot of money, a lot of state money to bring, people there. And they did the exact same thing with Elon Musk. And as soon as it was financially reasonable for him, he just moved there. And there go all of those jobs and all of those taxes and all of that. And if you look at some of the ones I mentioned earlier, like NBC Universal is not in a good place, right? We did this once, Zach, right? With NBC Universal, Comcast, NBC Universal, right? And then it'll be like, yeah. And now that's NBC. And similarly, Paramount, right? Lionsgate, all of even Sony is doing okay, but Fox had to be acquired. As soon as now they have these overlord companies, those companies are not run by film fans. Those companies are run by boards of Wall Street people. And we went from having the best agent ever running the studio to now the former CEO of Boeing running the studio, right? Which is a wildly different outlook. So there's going to be no romanticism as soon as it's more profitable and more effective to have these things in Austin versus LA, which I think is the primary competition right now is Austin. That like they'll do it in a heartbeat. There's no more romance, I don't think, around making. I mean, they maintain an office here, of course, but there's no more romance around it. I don't think that would take long at all once the waterfall starts.
And you've also just got straight tax, right? If you domicile as a famous actor in LA, you're paying an exorbitant amount of money to do that. I mean, Phil Mickelson talks about this and from the golf perspective. Why the hell would, he was a California guy. He's like, I can't can't continue to pay these exorbitant taxes on my winnings. Like, I'm out. I'm done. It's not happening.
Yeah. That's why so many live in Arizona and then they come play golf in LA and go back.
Yep. Yeah. It's interesting because I'm like looking at because I just had the definition for the Lindy effect up here, and it's, you know, I'm constantly reminded of how everything is physics, right? The laws of physics apply to everything. And that's literally what the Lindy effect is. The Lindy effect is just, you know, that theory of something that's been popularized for an extended period of time. The longer it's popular, the longer it's popular.
Until it's not.
And it's usually one of those things, though. But if you think about that, that's literally a conservation of momentum type thing.
Yep.
Where it's like you get momentum in the machine, you get it going. And I really think it's going to be interesting because, like, again, I used Mr. Beast as an example, but like the kids in North Carolina, right? And he's apparently built the biggest film studios in plural in North Carolina or South Carolina, wherever he is, because that's what it is. That's what he's doing. And all these other people, like the Daily Wire, and other people, it's like, oh, I'm going to go build a studio somewhere else.
Angel
because I can.
Studios in Utah, right?
Angel
Yep.
Studios, a perfect example. And actually,
Just
if you
chips
have
off the block.
Yep, you're gonna continue to see that. Mr. Beast is a good example because he's a singular guy, but
Mhm.
I really think that we're going into this world where you're going to have a much more vibrant ecosystem of a bunch of way smaller players carving out their niche and crushing that niche as best they can. Movies are interesting because when you're browsing for one, you want them to be in the same spot. Like, I'm not going to sign up for Angel Studios and Angel Wire, or, Daily Wire and Angel Studios and Disney and NBC. I'm not signing up for all of them, so the second somebody can kind of figure out where the best party is at and get people to agree on that and figure out a way to make it profitable is going to, have a pretty outsized advantage in my opinion. But in the meantime, technology is the same thing, right? Like when digital cameras started coming out, and this is true over anything. I just saw it in LA. You had this massive explosion of cameras, massive explosion of companies. Oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and then eventually the whole market just collapses on the one or two or three that they like, and that's it. So we're in this explosion right now where you're going to have an explosion of different content creation companies or storytellers or whoever, and I think it's going to be huge, and I think it's going to take a really long time. But eventually the market will settle on where people are browsing for those, as opposed to having to figure out, I'm going to manage 45 different subscriptions or whatever.
Yeah, it's interesting. The unique thing to think about then is like how far up the hardware chain can you go, right? Where it's like, how do you get Indie Hub or some of these other things is like the exclusive build. It's like Samsung with their phones. It's like you can pay a bunch of money to be like preloaded on a Samsung phone, and because it's advertising, whereas like Apple doesn't do that. And so it's just unique to see how content creators are thinking about that kind of stuff, because you're right, it's distribution. Like distribution is the key. It's all about eyeballs. And so it's going to be unique. Do you think, I'm actually curious both of your perspectives on this, what happens to movie theaters? Like what is the next iteration of a movie theater? Do these just become big boxes that become studios? Like they're actually super ripe to be turned into studio spaces because it's just these giant like sound controlled boxes. But what what do you think is next? Like, are people just gonna like rent them out? Is it gonna be one of those things like, oh, I go here and I play freaking Fortnite on a big screen?
I think you most of them will collapse. The big ones will collapse because they just can't sustain themselves. Rent's too expensive, tax, insurance, blah blah. And I think you're going to see a bunch of little ones pop up in local communities where they're basically just like their own little film club. It becomes a social deal where people go to hang out with each other. They watch movies. They do their thing. Much smaller, much nicer, much more comfortable with people people can rent them out. You could four-wall them. You could throw a festival at them or whatever. And the people who run those, basically, that's their whole life. And they don't necessarily have some giant agreement with a studio to distribute a movie. It's just a localized thing. I think that we'll see, I'm not saying like an insane amount of these pop up, but I think that that'll replace the megaplex for sure.
Yeah, I think I would agree. Every major city has that, right? LA's got 15 of those, and they're always full. Went to a Tuesday night screening of Tarkovsky's Stalker, which is like a 3-hour long Russian epic and one of my favorite movies. On a Tuesday night, it was full, it was packed, right? And that's the city where that would be packed. But there's something about, I love that place. It's called Vidiots, and there's another dozen of them. There's something about that. There's someone in charge who's curating what movies they're showing that makes me almost able to show up on any night and know that there's going to be quality there. And that's completely gone from the megaplex. That AMC is just showing what they've been given. There is no curation of that, whatsoever.
Well said. Yep.
Yeah, you're going to start paying, tastemakers. And it's this, right? It's what we're doing right now is we're trying to, find our voice in this void that is the next generation.
Sneeze.
We lost him.
Sneeze.
We lost him. Good
Bless
mute.
you.
Good mutes. I just did it too. Maybe it was contagious.
Excuse me. Sorry, man. I
Yeah.
was like, I don't want to blow everybody's ears up. I think I pulled something in my neck. That was cool. That was a fun one.
This is 40.
God, man, it's wild. Coming up in like the home stretch here, but I guess Corey, you've been traveling a bit, and what did you see kind of internationally on the cinema front, and do you think any of this stuff that's happening with the U.S. and tariffs and things like that are going to continue to encourage or discourage the creative, industry globally?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I was in Ireland, you could tell there was a palpable movement of Hollywood to Ireland specifically because their tax incentive is so good. They have a history of having good film crews. This is the other thing that people outside the industry don't really think about or expect. But you can't just drop a big budget movie into any country because you need so much local talent. You need to know that they're good on a set, and it's really rare in countries that don't have a history of filmmaking to be able to rely on that. And so they'll send advanced teams to train people so that they can keep up on a Hollywood fast-paced, big budget film set. In Ireland, they already have them, right? They have an incredible number of really strong film crews. Romania, Hungary are building that. Croatia is building that. That's where Game of Thrones was. So you just pull all of those people. Malta is a small community for that. And then you have the Italy, France, Spain, Germany that have a history of their own filmmakers. And the other thing I would say from spending 2 months in Italy on a film set and with filmmakers is because of the language barrier of all of those places, their incentive is either to make small movies for their country or big English movies that can travel to America. Because as what I was saying at the beginning about needing the Chinese market is true times 100 for every other country wanting to make a movie that would actually make some sort of serious financial return. Hollywood is still unique in the way that it can export a movie around the world and make a lot of money. Almost no other country in the entire world can do that. So when I was in Italy talking to Italian filmmakers, they're saying, we want to make this an Italian story. We want to make it in Italy, but the maximum amount of money we think we can actually make on an Italian movie is maybe 20 to $40 million. But if we make it in English and we get an American star in it and we tell that story, there's a chance we could make 150 or 200 or $250 million. So as America goes, much of the rest of the world goes in terms of where the big dollars are. In terms of scale, it's still orders of magnitude ahead what Hollywood is doing versus the rest of the world.
Zach,
to say nothing of talent and quality of movie, by the way.
Yeah, and I think that actually goes to my next big question is, if you guys aren't familiar with the movie The King's Speech, it was an old Oscar winner, and by old I mean 10, 15 years ago. But the guy who got that movie made was Franklin Leonard, and Franklin was like an assistant who read that movie. It's going to happen. He created this thing called the Blacklist. And he just kept pushing it at people, basically, kept putting in their stacks of. So basically, the executives usually printed out stacks of scripts that they would go read over the weekend. And then, usually as an assistant, because at one point in time you would read these things and you'd write coverage. I've written coverage for TV shows. I wrote coverage for one or two TV shows that ended up being made. And it's just always weird. Coverage is basically you read the script and you basically make a 1-page synopsis, and you need to be good at writing page synopses to tell people, read this, don't read this, because if you write good coverage and then they read it and it's actually something they make, they trust you more. Where I'm going with this though is, the tastemaker thing we were talking about. I'm curious, Zach, what do you think that is going to kind of look like in this next world? Because things like The King's Speech, or even more recently, Squid Game, right, are things that some tastemaker somewhere saw and they're like, yes, and they're making big bets on it. And so, how do you think that's going to iterate and change? Are we going to get to a point where we have decentralized budgeting, whereas Angel Studios, they literally are making $100 million a year with their guild, where people are paying them $100 a year to just kind of pre-watch movies? Are we going to get more guild type stuff where it's that, or do you think it's going to be the studio model surviving in some way, shape, or form?
No, I think everything further decentralizes. I think that as companies try to figure out how to monetize storytelling again, the interesting thing about movies is that they really have this curve of attention and profitability, and it's generally kind of early on in its life cycle, and you might have a couple of waves and whatnot down the line, but in other words, the point I'm trying to make is that there need to be a steady stream of novel new ideas and movies being pumped out to continue to be profitable. And so I think any company vying for talent or good movies is going to have their own quote unquote tastemaker, on staff. And those people are going to have relationships with directors and actors and producers. And, in a model like Indie Hub, those types of people can just say, hey, I'll bake myself onto this cap table. I've got a relationship with the guys over at such and such dot whatever. And, I vouch for these guys. I have a good track record. 9 out of the 10 movies that I thought would hit. And so you need my opinion. Like, I think these people can commoditize themselves to some extent. And it's just much more interesting way to do it in a decentralized world rather than, hey, I'm going to go, apply for a job at Universal or whatever, as opposed to I'm my own kind of freelance contractor and I've got good relationships and I know a particular market is going to respond to a particular idea in a particular way. So I think those people, kind of end up generating their own category, so to speak. And again, my theme on all of this is just further decentralization. Movies, the business of movies and how movies coalesce and fall apart are very entrepreneurial, and they're very contractor driven. And you don't need to be employed by one. Again, back to peak centralization, right? Like a studio put a director under contract or a writer under contract, and that person worked for that studio. But I don't think that we're going to that world. I think it's going to continue to be exceptionally entrepreneurial and relationship driven. And, in a digital world where you don't need to be in a physical place to have contact with somebody who might be a tastemaker or who might be a great director, you don't need to, be, conversing with people on the back lot at lunch every day to make, connections. You've got social media for that. So yeah, I don't know if that answered the question, but I just think we further decentralization. And in aggregate, I think that increases the value of the industry. It's just that the financial benefits of those don't get plowed into one entity.
Yeah, I agree. And we have those. Yeah, did you want to ask a slightly different question? I was going to riff on that.
You can jump on it, but I'll answer that thing. But what I want to know is, do you think it's going to be more advantageous to own a small theater or a drive-in in the future?
I'd still say the small theater because we still, for all of our technology, we've never solved sound in drive-ins. It's terrible. What I was going to say about the tastemakers is there's still. I would say that most of the people with the proclivity for tastemaking, who have really good taste in scripts and executing movies, and have been developing that skill for their whole careers, are still at the studios. And over the past 2.5 years, 40% of them have been laid off, and they're all somewhere. And I would guess that right now, most of them are carrying mortgages or wondering what to do next and trying to get back in. But I don't think those jobs are coming back. And that means I think there's an enormous amount of people with really good taste who are really good at developing scripts, who have a really good eye for talent, who know how to make movies. And I think that's only going more away from the studios. They're still there because the people that can really make the movies at scale are still the studios. That's the thing that's dying. And if you want to make $250,000 to read scripts and make movies, then you have to be in one of those places. Those are the only places that are paying you to do it. As those jobs continue to go away, I think you're going to have what Zach was talking about of a peak boomer, but a peak millennial of 40 to 50-year-olds who have this skill that's still valuable in the marketplace somehow. And if someone can figure out how to grab all of those people and market them, or even a handful of those people and empower them, I think you're just going to see that move elsewhere in Hollywood as these studios fail. But right now, it still is the gate that everyone's trying to get to. It's just getting smaller and smaller with more people trying to get through it.
How do you get those guys involved with AI? Like, I'm very curious if you guys have thought about this, but you actually just hit something that I didn't even think about. Like, I have good friends who are over at Sony and people are over at CBS, and they all got laid off. And it's like, that's actually a really interesting thing is you have these people who are really good at, taste making and really good at plussing things. And then you have these kids who are really good at prompting. Like, yeah, how do you connect those two? That's an interesting thought.
It's an interesting thought. I still think we're really far away. For as exciting as AI is and as fast as it's moving, I think we're so far away from an AI actually making a movie on its own, apart from a very expensive production. And by very expensive, I mean like $5 million. And maybe AI can now take a $5 million production and make it look like a $12 million production, but I don't think we're anywhere close to $200,000 looking like what we consider a $25 million movie to make. And I think
man, some of these Trump music videos.
Well, that's the thing, right? I do the image generation and all of it, and I see it. And I think you're more seeing like the actual practical things, like some of the like VFX jobs. I think a VFX house is very close from needing to be 100 people to needing to be like 20 people, and that's devastating for that element of the business. But we're not even close to taking a performance, like a strong actor's performance or a dynamic between two people on screen that comes out of the magic of acting and directing, and being able to recreate that with AI. I just think we're adding a tool that's going to make it generally cheaper, but I don't see it replacing it at all.
Yeah, you've got to, we're seeing the old thing die and a new thing has to be born. And for the new thing to be born, you've got to crawl, then you got to walk, then you got to run. Nobody's going to be running anytime soon. But what I would say to people like that is, get your crew together. You're a good showrunner. You know some good people. You have some interesting ideas. Get some young, talented filmmakers together. Throw up something great. Whip up a little bit of an audience. Put it on Indie Hub. Bake yourself into the cap table and get paid in a novel way that you weren't able to get paid before. In other words, test out a new way of doing things, test out a market, test out a way to monetize something that's different than the old model, and see if you can figure out a way to say, okay, we did something this small of this budget and got this return. How can we make this bigger? How can we import an audience from one platform to the other platform? I mean, it's why I founded Indie Hub, but I really, really think that the relevant question for the whole thing is, where is the money coming from? Mm-hmm. And how is that revenue being distributed? Those are the big questions. And if you can solve for that a little bit with the way tech is now and the way payments work, it's going to take time. To Corey's point, like the peak millennial, he's going to have to be the old guy now who teaches young guys how to do things, but he has the overall knowledge on how to do it. So you got to take people under your wing. You got to take risks. You got to try new things. But I really think that the answer to almost all of this is saying the corporate structure is no longer sustainable. It's too heavy. It's too overweight. It's too admin heavy. And you got to go out and take risks and try to put it on platforms like Indie Hub and get yourself paid in a novel way.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Do you guys have any last kind of thoughts on anything you guys are working on that's coming up you want to shout out before we wrap up for today?
Not too much other than go check out Indie Hub. I do think it's worth, I don't know if we have any answers on this one, but it's worth thinking about the difference of how to value something that's digital versus how to value something that's physical, and the constraints of something that's physical versus the constraints of something that's digital. Growing beef is going to be capturable, so to speak. It's going to be, there's a clear things that you have to do to deliver your product, but that's not necessarily true in the digital world. And, I think that it's really worth thinking about in a time of political uncertainty where the value chain, how the value chain works in a given market, and where the efficiencies lie and the inefficiencies lie.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think there's this temptation to think that because it's digital, it means free. And I think we've just been renting things with our information for such a long time. And I think as that goes away, people will realize that none of that was actually free. Your data was just being sold a lot. And I think that era is slowly ending as well. And I think we'll have more of a sense that things aren't free. I think you could run into where you are paying for email accounts and things like that. And I think, as something's free, it becomes lower quality, right? That's just necessarily. So if all of your content, if all of your entertainment you expect to be free, you're going to be getting a pretty low standard of entertainment. And I think taste will demand that people pay for things.
It's interesting because that brings into, going back, we haven't talked much about Bitcoin on those, but that goes to Adam Back's idea of hash cash. And so it's like, if people aren't familiar with this, but it was essentially, if you wanted to spam somebody with email, you had to pay for it. And that was part of the philosophy and stuff that Satoshi used in his thinking to create like proof of work and all that other stuff for Bitcoin. But I actually think you hit on something really, really interesting about, getting to a true Bitcoin future where things are, Bitcoin based. I don't want to use the word tokenized because that's not what I'm talking about. I'm literally talking about a Bitcoin first foundation, because if you are charged 10 sats or 1 sat even to reach a person. People are doing that now with Zaps, right? On Nostr and on Orange Pill app. If you are paying something, if it has a little bit of a sting to it, you're going to put a little bit more thought into it. It's not going to be one of those things you just like, oh, it's like I'm going to reach 100 million people. It's like, no, I want to reach 50 qualified people, and I will pay more to do that. But because I'm paying more to do that, I'm going to actually spend more time to do it. So I think it's actually interesting. You know, we'll get to a place where AI is just flooding the zone, which is where we're at right now. But it's going to come back. Like the pendulum will switch from flooding the zone to actually like quality. And so right now, though, we're probably, you know, we're on our way this way to flooding the zone. We're probably like here. So we got a lot more zone flooding to happen. But I do think the tool, as it's sharpened when it comes back the other direction and we're rebuilding things and we're seeing 3D printed sculptures and things like that, I think we're in for a really, I think the new cultural renaissance is going to be really cool to see.
I think I've had some really interesting conversations from the Indie Hub side of things, from the exhibition side of how do you continue to monetize digital content in where everything digital becomes free. When information is free, how do you monetize that content, and will that content have a viable business model at all? And one of the things that I don't have an answer to it, but one of the things I think about is like, to Corey's point, things that are free are generally going to be the cheap, lame thing. And, you know, even if you get one filmmaker who's really good at AI and is able to pump out something that's really kick-ass with AI, it's still going to generally be better if you have 50 great people working on a thing. And there's, you know, the competition is always relative. Like, yeah, we're going to be able to do things that we weren't able to do before with half of the people. But if we use the same amount of people we were using before, we're going to do something that is significantly greater or more valuable, for lack of a better expression, than we were doing before. So, you know, like, I guess what I'm saying is products that require a lot of human talent and coordination will probably always capture or demand some premium, because it's the collective efforts of a lot of people who are really fucking good at what they do, regardless of whether they're using AI or not.
Yeah,
it's still going to be a better output with better input.
The simplest way to say that is, and it's my favorite thing to do and look at, is, but 2 + 2 in good business, 2 + 2 always equals 5. Period.
Yeah.
Like 2 + 2 must equal 5, or you're not actually doing what you need to be doing. And 5 is the intangible. Like 4 is table stakes. 4 is you made your money back. You made P&A. 5 is, you know, you have the Dark Knight series, right? 2 + 2 equal 5, and that thing of like, it's a cultural icon, and it's one of those things that's got that intangible that is going to sustain and have a Lindy effect.
Yeah, the whole should be greater than the sum of its parts, which is really, honestly, the magic of filmmaking. You know, I think you talk to most people who got into that business. There is some just incredible thing that happens when you get a great group of people together working on a project and you do something wonderful. There's that extra element that comes in out of nowhere that's only possible when you've got great talent.
It feels like magic. It feels like magic. Like it literally is indescribable when it actually fires like that. Comes
yeah, and it does equal more than the input for sure. So I think there'll always be a premium on that.
It's the cocaine. Like it's interesting, because I was even thinking about that indentured servitude. It's like, why are people here who are actors or whatever, gaffers, grips, who just haven't worked in a long time? And it's that thing you're talking about. It's like the ability to feel God, essentially. Because I do think that is the Big Bang moment, right? It was that spark that kind of created everything, right? And it's like, you want that spark. You're chasing that spark. You're chasing lightning.
Well, I think it is. I mean, the Genesis thing is important, right? It's like God created man, it's like, then in his image. Just that phrase implies that it is a godly thing to create, and we are in his image, so we can create. So when we create, we are acting like God, right? It logically processes what I said at the beginning, that storytelling is one of the oldest things. It's like, it's been a godly activity as long as we've been human.
Mm-hmm.
I've had this conversation where people sometimes with VCs or like business people who just don't like, well, why are people like, where are all these, you know, like, in other words, how many movies could you get on the platform? Like, there are 14,000 submissions to Sundance every year, the overwhelming majority of which you'll never see or hear about. And the question is, from business-minded people, like, well, 2 + 2 is not equaling 4 in that situation. I'm like, what you don't understand is that we're addicts. We can't stop. There is something else afoot here that's not just the balance sheet making sense. Yeah. So if you can just solve that, if you can just connect those markets, you can connect the addicts that are constantly making things to people who are constantly consuming things. You've got something that'll win.
Yep.
Speaking of knickknacks and Zen, this is not a tobacco ad, by the way.
No
Sweet.
free ads.
No free ads. I will do a shout out though. We're going to be doing some stuff for Bitcoin Film Festival that is going to be advertising focused. So be looking out for that. And hang on a sec, bud. And yeah, but I think that's probably the end for today. So thank you guys for jumping in. Thank you everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you probably Thursday. I think we're gonna do another one. So
Awesome.
Dope. Thanks,
Cheers.
guys.
See you guys.
Got a good thing coming, and it's all I